development of the National Artificial Intelligence Framework, while also chairing the National Data Sharing Policy Task Force. Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for our moderator, Dr. Karl Ng. The floor is now yours, Dr. Karl.
Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, like to thank the organizer for inviting me to moderate this session for today. As what the MC has mentioned, today's topic focuses on data, right? So in today's world, data is becoming more and more important, and data drives the digital the solutions and so forth. So it is important for us collectively to utilize our data for development of a more progressive and inclusive society. And this panel seeks to highlight the importance of data sharing and ways to foster a data sharing culture. This panel will also discuss whether the policy framework at the national level can be a key vehicle to drive Malaysia to be a data-driven nation. I would like to welcome a member of panelists up to the stage for today. First of all, I'd like to welcome Encik Husni Abdul Aziz, who is attached to the Policy and Strategic Planning Division of Ministry of Communication and Multimedia, Malaysia. A quick background of Encik Husni. He's currently at the Policy and Strategic Planning Division, and he has plays a lot of different roles in the ministry in his previous position, including Head of Communication Coordination, Command Center, Education and Training Director of Community Communications Department, Head of KPI Unit, and also an officer with a special function, parliamentary and ministerial affairs to the minister. Right, so Encik Husni has worked as a PTD officer since the year 2005, and he holds a master's degree from UKM in strategic and security analysis. So welcome to the stage. The next panelist is Dr. Sharlene. She's the CEO of TM R&D, which is the R&D arm of TM. And Dr. Sharlene has a lot of experience in R&D, 21 years in the ICT industry. And her experience is very strong in commercialization, where she has commercialized 18 solutions and delivers 7 mission-critical systems from TM Group. So, distinguished career in R&D. And lastly, we have Sheriza Zakaria, which is the CEO of Big Dataworks. Sheriza holds a bachelor degree from UUM, and he has more than 20 years experience in ICT industry. He has done large projects in different ICT companies, and later he co-founded My Data Services and secured a 6 years concession from SSM under a PFI model. And he was instrumental in getting My Data SSM to be recognized by even the Malaysian Book of Records for the first implementation of digital certified true copy services in the government agency, right? So he has experience working with the government and making data available through a commercial model, right? So with that introduction, let me start the panel session for today. First of all, I would like the panelists to quickly introduce yourself in the area of data sharing, and perhaps share your experience in data sharing. Okay, Husni.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karl. compared to the other two panelists, I'm perhaps the most junior in data sharing. But currently, I'm in charge of the data management unit of the policy division at the ministry. And we are tasked with championing data sharing policy for the country. In this regard, I would like to refer to the earlier sessions. Earlier this morning, we heard from Lord Vezi and also Pak Tom how important it is to have a very clear and consistent policy statement with regards to data sharing. For example, Lord Vezi mentioned that the second most important thing in digital economy is to have the right regulation in place. So, according to research by World Bank, somewhere back, which we use as the foundation for the development of our national data sharing policy, Malaysia is rated as an emulator country, not a trailblazer like, say, the UK or Korea. But we are not also just a participant. We, according to the 7 criteria listed by the World Bank, we are quite okay, especially in the ASEAN region. If you look at the ecosystem, even Pak Tom mentioned that we always come short marketing ourselves, and that we are the the well-kept secret of the ASEAN region. So we have all the potential. And I think with the approved NDSP in April this year, this is also very significant, I think, because it demonstrates a long-term commitment of the government to promote cross-sectoral data sharing. We have had earliest government circular introduced by Mampu, for example, on open data in 2015. And very recently, also this year, the government data sharing circular and also the data-driven government framework. But this is the next step. The country is now ready for the next step, which is to promote cross-sectoral data sharing. You know, not just to promote data sharing among government agencies, but also with the private sector and also NGO and the masses as a whole. So this is what we are doing now. It's a huge task. This is what we are embarking for the next few years.
Right, okay. Maybe I think I'll backtrack to just explain what's data sharing, right? So I think in simplest form, it's basically you share a data between an organization to another organization, or could be person to person, right? So in the area of data that can be shared, there's basically 3 different spectrum, right? So one, it's open data, which is publicly made available where by organizations or individuals, where this data can be used and reused to serve a particular purpose, right? So, for example, in the UK, under Transport of London, they make the data of transportation schedule open and available, right? By doing so, then the solution providers can take this data and incorporate this in their app. For example, if you want to go to a restaurant, you know what's the time of the next bus to go to that restaurant, right? So it creates a different value, right? There's also a category of data where it's restricted by permission, right? So you have to get permission from the other party to share the data, right? So you have to sign a certain confidential agreement and so forth, right? So that is the second category of data, right? Of course, there's also data which is highly restricted, which is it could be company secret, it could be financial statement, etc. Right? So those are actually restricted to a certain access level, right? So this is basically difference of data sharing. So what we are trying to do from the national data sharing policy is to encourage people to share data safely within the framework of the law, as well as making sure that it's also complying with the security access level as well, right? So that's what we intend to do, right? So to give you more examples in terms of what is the industry is doing when it comes to data sharing, perhaps I'd like to invite Dr. Sharlene, who has a lot of experience in driving data sharing within organizations, within TM group, as well as other organizations. Right? Perhaps Dr. Sharlene would like to share your experience.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Karl, for inviting me to this panel, and it's really a pleasure to be here. So TMR&D is the innovation arm of Telecom Malaysia, and we have been in business for the last 21 years. And over the last, what we have done differently over the last 6 years is also expand our reach to work not just with TM, but also for enterprises outside TM. And here is where we help bring digital solutions to help their businesses. So in fact, we have also expanded further to help businesses outside Malaysia. So we have exported like 6 solutions to 6 countries, the farthest being to South Africa. Our most popular product is the Smart Safety Helmet, where it's actually leveraging data that you get on the work site to provide a safer work environment for the people in the field. So back to Dr. Karl's point and question about the work that we have done nationally. This is a project that we have done with MDEC. This was during the COVID time, where we shared the use of TMR&D's own open innovation platform. That's a data sharing platform as part of the Data Technology Partner Initiative with, I think it was called COVID versus Digital. And it's about allowing researchers to share data. And this was, can you imagine the early stage of COVID when nobody understood what was going on, what was the key symptoms to look out for, what were the drivers of, of transmission and so on. And so we allowed this platform to be used globally. Researchers, government officials shared data, whatever they could. And researchers leverage on this data to provide insights, and insights to be shared back to their institutions, to their respective organizations. So it put in motion for people to see how, with just sharing open data, correlations can be made, and to help the businesses and the governments of the day. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Sharlene. Going back to my earlier example on open data, right? So I mentioned that in London they actually made the data available through the Transport for London open data platform, right? In Malaysia as well, there's data.gov.my, which is the Malaysian open data platform, and it's run by Mampu, right? So far, I think there's thousands of data. Tens of thousands of data which is available at that portal, right? The issue is sometimes the data may not be useful for you because it's basically a series of different data sets, right? So the data is not customized to the researchers or solutions provider requirements, right? So, but in Malaysia, there are also different organizations that are making the data available to the public through a platform, right? So here we have Sheriza, who has been partnering with a government entity, which is SSM, to provide data services to the public and different organizations. Perhaps Sheriza can provide certain insights in terms of your experience doing this, and how organizations can benefit from this data sharing. Okay.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Right. First of all, thank you for having me. I will just do justice to the organizer and moderator and MC. I'll be short and sweet, okay? Otherwise, we'll be talking like in hours and hours, right? So this clock is ticking now, 25 minutes we have. Okay, so Big Dataworks is a company which is given the rights to service the market by the government agency. So we actually supplies company registry data from Suruhanjaya Syarikat Malaysia, where the data contains information on corporate structure, compliance information, financial standings, and annual reports, which are consumed by credit rating agency, banks, financial services, professional bodies, and audit firms, just to name a few. So our service is also widely known as My Data SSM. This is a sole trustworthy data source that comes direct from SSM database registry. And this is on a PPP model, which stands for public-private partnership. So from our experience managing data on behalf of the government and government agency, we see there are a lot more data source that the public wants. And this is for the use of, for their businesses to do analytics, for them to do insights, for them to do projections and predictions, because today data is all about making informed decision. So we would like to see more participation from government agency to open up to private sector to come and collaborate together and give our value and give input to how we can make the data sharing experience more forward-looking. I'm happy to say that we have been invited by KKOMM to be a representative for the private sector and become the National Data Sharing Policy Committee member. So we are allowed to give inputs on how we can do better in creating the policy for the benefit of the government nation. So that's all.
Okay, thank you, Sheriza. Just for information, earlier on today morning, I think the Secretary General of Communication and Multimedia Ministry has shared that the Prime Minister have announced the National Data Sharing Policy, which has been approved by the Cabinet earlier this year, right? So the whole idea here is to provide the businesses and the public and also government sectors as to look into data sharing, and this is a reference point as basically serve as a guide to encourage people to look at data sharing, right? So the approach is more like a soft approach rather than a hard approach, where a lot of guidelines are given, a lot of hand-holding, trainings, and so forth, right? But the whole idea, it's within the next 2 to 3 years, the government wants to review this and to see whether or not there's a need to look into a data sharing act for the public sector, right? So that's the long-term vision of it, but we're starting the ball rolling to make sure that everyone understood the potential of data sharing and the regulations and how to do it safely as well, right? So that's the essence of it. And we have come a long way when it comes to data sharing. In Malaysia, currently there's 2 different act that looks at data sharing, right? So from a private sector standpoint, any data that's transaction commercially falls under the Personal Data Protection Act, right? So those related to the private sector. From government's perspective, it's basically the OSA, Official Secret Act, where it's governed under the information that classified, and certain information required certain approval level, right, from the government standpoint. So that's the overall picture in terms of the data sharing landscape for Malaysia, right? Obviously, there's a lot of different challenges when it comes to data sharing. So from an earlier study, typically it falls into 3 categories. Either the person do not want to share because information is power, and therefore I just refuse to share, right? So that's one category. The second is I want to share, but the laws and regulation, it's not permitting for me to share. There's no guidelines and so forth, right? So that's second reason why people don't share. The third reason why people don't share, it's there's lack of resources and even technology that allows them to share, right? So sometimes you're not allowed to share details of the data, right? But if you can aggregate this data, you can anonymize this data, it can be shared. But they do not have the technology and know how to do this, right? So that's basically some of the reasons why people don't share the data, right? But going back to this question, I'm going to ask all the panelists, what sort of challenges that you face in the area of data sharing, right? You can summarize this quickly. 3 different challenges in data sharing.
Yeah.
Husni?
Thank you very much. The Karl pretty much has summarized the whole issue. But just to point out several observations, looking at the government approach. As Dr. Karl mentioned earlier, initially the council, the Digital Economy Council, recommended that we draft, facilitate the drafting of the Omnibus Act for data sharing. But after negotiation, we opted for a more incremental approach. In that, we proceed with the implementation of the policy first, and then after 2 years, we will conduct an impact analysis and whether it's a requirement. But I think if you look at the scenario in developed countries, it's a must. Like say for Korea, they have their own Information Act, for example, not to say compel people to share, but to facilitate further, especially across sectors. But in terms of the public sector, I think we have to look at upskilling and capacity building at the lowest level, because we are talking about driving digitalization for the country. But what about the staff? Are they well trained in, let's say, data science, or at least the definition, or the basic dimensions. The earlier concern would be about sharing classified data, for example. I think with us coming up with this national data sharing policy is a paradigm shift, ladies and gentlemen, in the sense that we are shifting towards an open-end approach. You can share data, but not the classified ones. Not to say upright, you can't share this because these are classified data. Previously, it was the mindset. Thirdly, I would have to point out the lack of focus in the departments, for example. We have to multitask most of the time. Government officers, they don't really have very specified focus areas. You have to drive the policy, you have to mingle around with you guys. You need to know the nitty-gritty technical details as well. Not to say to be an expert, but in order to drive and to move the policy, we have to engage them. So that's what we are doing now. We have under the NDSP 2 committees, and for the technical committee, we have representatives from the private sector, the academia, to give inputs on areas which needs to be further developed. For example, development of data sharing agreement format, for example, things like anonymization and monetization of data, and how it could benefit government agencies as well as businesses, for example, and establishing a common platform where this could be done safely and avoiding data breach. You need to also emphasize on security as well. So these are the things that we're looking into and should be more focused on.
Okay. A quick one, Dr. Sharlene, challenges in data sharing?
Okay, Dr. Karl, I'll give you 3. Quickly, underlying IT infrastructure that is not built to scale, legacy source systems, and the third one is management's understanding of what it takes to actually drive data sharing as well as digital transformation.
Okay, thank you. We will elaborate more later. Perhaps Sheriza?
Okay, I have a quick one. One is data availability, because there's not a lot of data out there. And number 2 will be data format, because we have all sorts of data format. Imagine in banks, they are still using legacy data. And now the technology space, they're already into a lighter, a better language, better platform, which doesn't carry a lot of bytes and spaces. The last one will be communication. Communication on awareness, communication between the industry player, and communication between the stakeholder, which is government and private sector. So that's 3.
Okay, so the next question is the last question. Is basically, despite these challenges, do you think we are ready to be a data-driven nation? And if there's a policy, how would this policy at the national level be able to cultivate a data sharing ecosystem, right? So these questions, I will start with Sheriza first.
All right. In my opinion, we are not ready yet. There's a lot of work to do. In fact, data operators and data users have been longing for government to open up their data sharing policy since last 10 years. Okay. But yes, with NDSP, better late than never, yeah. But yes, with NDSP, it will spur value creation instead of valuation, just like Pak Tommy said this morning, especially to B2B and B2C markets. And this will promote more application innovation, enrichment of public and private data, and eventually will shape the people towards data-driven nation. I think, yes, we will go there, but, and we will benefit from this data sharing policy.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Sharlene?
Okay, first of all, congratulations to the Ministry and to MDEC for getting the National Data Policy approved at Cabinet. We are eagerly awaiting what it says in the policy document. But I am actually a great believer of allowing the market forces to dictate, and how to drive change, especially on data sharing policy. And this is especially for the enterprises, because I believe enterprises will instinctively know who to work with, what to do, and how to open up data, which data they want to open up, because it drives business value. So they will know this. Perhaps a policy is needed. Now there's already a policy, but retrospectively, policy is needed to unblock certain impediments, but not for monetization. And I think that's where I feel it should be market forces that decides how data is shared, how much, and so on. So totally believe that we need a policy to govern perhaps government data, because that belongs to the people in some sense, non-sensitive data. How can that be shared for businesses to leverage on and provide greater insights, better products? As a person working in innovation. That's all we look for, to be able to create better products, better insights, and for the business. Thank you.
Husni?
I think the feedback from our two earlier panelists are very positive. And we are positive about it. But we have to recognize the gap that we have, as it was noted by the two co-chairs of our implementation committee, the MDEC CEO and also our Deputy SecGen during our first meeting in August. We need to address both, the business community, the high-tech players, and also the needs of the masses, the people, the population. Because, I think, communication and awareness is very important. I think you all have friends who have been using Google Map throughout their lives to get to places, and yet if you do a survey, you ask them, are you engaged in data sharing? You will not get an emphatic yes, because they don't really know what it means, and how they could benefit from data sharing. So we also need to address that.
I think what's key here is use cases, right? So I think there's a lot of use cases around here, but we are not aware, right? So I think how many of you use Waze coming to this location this morning because of the jam, right? So Waze is a classic example of a data sharing, because by agreeing for using Waze data, you basically crowd sharing, right? Crowd share, right? Your location data, so that people can be informed in terms of number of traffics on the road, traffic jam, and so forth. Because your driving pattern, the speed of your vehicle are being tracked, right? And that data provides richness when it comes to predicting traffic jam and predicting the time taken for you to come from your home to this location, right? So that's one example. And Waze actually has this program where they allow government to tap on this data. And some governments have done a very good job. For example, the Selangor state government has used this data, Waze data, whenever you put in a pothole data into the road and then someone agreed, that data basically goes back to the municipal council to repair that roads, right? So there's additional value added, right? Because of like Waze, they allow the community to access this data, then a lot more value can be created, right? So this is just one example, right, that you don't see, but it's already happening on the ground, right? So I have several more minutes. Perhaps I can open the floor for any questions. I can open for 2 questions, perhaps. Anyone?
We have some questions for you on Slido, Dr. Karl.
All
We'll
right.
just put that up on the slide on the screen for you.
Okay, regards to data sharing, is there any privacy issues for personal identifiable information data collected and shared, right? Perhaps, Doc, you want to answer this? PII.
So largely the work that I do revolves around open data. So data that is, I would say, not identified with a transaction or with a person. And if it is anonymized. So we have done systems for the frontliners, for Telecom Malaysia, where when you call the call center, what you want to know is what's wrong with my line, or how can I get my service faster, and so on. So in that scenario, what we have done is pulled up all data from network, customer information, billing information, and so on. So you get a one-stop information drive from that. So those are some of the examples that we have done.
Yeah. So I think in this case, PII is basically by consent, right? So the PDPA, it's run by consent. So as long as there's consent given, and you're given the consent, the data can be shared to another party, right? So you don't consent, you will not, right? For example, like given by Dr. Sharlene earlier on, the contact center, when you call in, they basically ask you, right? your details, and you consented to those by giving those things to receive a particular services, right? So the consent is basically given, right? So that in essence it's based on PDPA. The second question is, when it comes to real-time data sharing, how far is Malaysia into discussing this matter? Right, I think real-time data share.
I think, okay, I can answer that question. What we are doing in Moderator SSM with our registry of company commission, we are actually supplying real-time data to the public. We are the gateway between the public and SSM, and there's no benefit to keep data because data keep on changing. So what we do is just whenever there's a query, we just go and get data real time from SSM. So that is the importance of having data from the trustworthy source. So I think if you want to replicate this model, data owners should be with those who has the authority. But you can allow the market to get the data, provided that you are given the access to use the data. So rightfully so that you pointed out, if you give a consent before you sign up to use the service, that means you are allowing people to take data and vice versa. And for information, public domain data, SSM is actually a public domain data. You can buy information on companies for the purpose of doing due diligence, but SSM cannot be selling personal data like where do they stay, their IC and wherever not. So there are things that you can supply, there are things you cannot, but it's just a matter of awareness and understanding of the right of use of data. I think that's the misconception.
Okay.
Can I
yeah,
say
sure.
something? So I believe in real-time data, but it depends on use case. So a lot of the work that we do use real-time data, for example, network health, diagnostics, and so on. And there are certain cases where real-time data is not required, maybe near real-time. So not everything needs to be real-time. A lot of it would go back to the use case and the underlying infrastructure that you need. For example, if network data don't change so often, then every 15 minutes is good enough as a dipstick, and so on and so on. You know, but a lot of our work actually now real-time data.
Okay, so I have about 3 more minutes left. So perhaps, I think before I close the session, let me just allow all the panelists to point out, your wish when it comes to data sharing. What is your aspiration would be for data sharing and how can we progress towards a data-driven nation? Sheriza?
Okay, quick one. I wish the government will allow more participation from public and private in data sharing initiative. Probably allow B2B to work close together to drive the whole initiative. And number 2, for the government to actually promote awareness, support the data stakeholder, which is data user, data owner, and data operator. And probably last one is to give protection of IP, and then the rights to use of data, and probably the last one to observe the competition between the players healthily.
Okay, Sharlene?
My measure of success would be to launch the next unicorn for Malaysia, leveraging on the open data that that the government is allowing.
Okay, it's a tall order, but it's a good aspiration. Husni?
Yeah, representing the government, I would have to say that, okay, first of all, just to inform that we are going to have our first technical committee meeting next week. So we'll be looking into the details and you'll be invited. No worries. So we'll discuss the specific KPIs to be achieved, and we'll be open to discuss specific issues. But of course, in the long I would not repeat the overused sentence that data is the new oil, you know. But it's the reality now. You may have the most expensive car, but if you don't have fuel, it will not move anywhere, you know. You may have the technology, you may have the talent, but without data and data exchange, it won't work to support the vision to become a fully digitalized nation. You know, for the long term, we'll be looking at promoting innovation and also economic growth in the digital economy, for example, from data exchange. But we must also look into the small steps, yeah, perhaps to increase the volume of data exchange between the public and private sector, for example, you know, promote the best practices and have an inventory of use cases. Because we have under our NDSP committee 22 over ministries, 6 key agencies under KKOMM, and also representatives from the private sector. So yeah, I think we could better synergize to achieve our long-term objective in this regard.
Okay, so run out of time, 0.00. So let me just quickly summarize this in 30 seconds, right? So I think, are we ready to be a data-driven nation? Not yet. Obviously, there's a lot of work needs to be done in terms of capacity building, awareness, looking into PPP, you know, between public-private partnership and so forth, so that we're able to increase data accessibility and the understanding of data. So use cases are key, right? So we need to build use cases for the benefit of rakyat and businesses, right? And if everyone works together as an ecosystem, all stakeholders works together, I believe that, you know, we can get there. And it's also the right time as well, because right now the government is committed into data sharing, and we have formed committees to look into this, the National Data Sharing Policy Implementation Committees. And we will be doing a lot of engagement, I'm sure, to look into taking small steps, you know, guideline by guideline, you know, and unlocking some of these challenges so that we're able to move further when it comes to make our nation to become data-driven. Right? With that, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karl. And a big round of applause for Dr. Karl and our panelists, Dr. Sharlene, Sheriza, and Mohamad Husni. Thank you so much for all of your input and insights into that very interesting topic of discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, for any feedback on this session, please do take a picture of the QR code, head there and give us your feedback via the survey on Slido that we'll put up on the screen in just a little bit. Now, Dr. Karl did an excellent job of summarizing the session, but I have also been copiously taking notes during the session, so please do allow me to also add to the notes that I have been taking. Now, to enable a data-driven economy means encouraging people to share data safely within the framework of the law, while also complying with security access levels. Now, it's evident that with the rise in digitalization, companies require a lot more data sources for them to do analytics, insights, and projections. And the National Data Sharing Policy launched early this year is a guide on how to conduct data sharing responsibly and securely, but within the next 2 to 3 years, it may be reviewed on whether this policy will need to be formulated further into an act. So, is Malaysia ready? As Dr. Karl summarized, there is a lot of work to be done. So maybe not just yet, the gaps need to be recognized and more public-private partnerships need to be created. But the panelists are overall positive that it can be done. Dr. Sharlene reckoned that market forces must be allowed to dictate what data needs to be shared, and more awareness needs to be created on data protection, plus the types and benefits of data sharing. The most important thing in a successful digital economy, as Sheriza said, is to have the right regulations in place, and that restricted data needs to be more secure. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed that session. Another big round of applause, please, for our panelists. They did an excellent job of taking that issue apart and putting it back together.